I'm in Japan indefinitely. I really love the country. I like it here. Like I said, no place is perfect. I'm from the second largest town in Hungary. It's called Debrecen. Like I was trying to live somebody else's life. Like I was trying to live a life that other people would think is valuable.
Some people have this concern that maybe if I go to Japan, it's going to be like maybe more like outdated tech.
And then I was here in Tokyo and it was just mind-blowing, like it's much more dense, much better connected. Every part of Tokyo feels like has its own character. I also had an internship offer from Google. One of my best friends became this guy who was like really into programming, and he basically taught me the basics of programming, and we worked on a lot of cool stuff together. I feel like I spent too much time on trying to learn stuff from books and from other people, and the reason that never works is there are 8 billion of us and we're all unique.
Welcome to the Japan Dev Podcast. I am Eric, founder of japandev.com, and today I'm sitting down with Máté Kovács, who is a software engineer who's been in Japan for now about 6 years. He's had a really amazing career working at some of the top companies here, so I'm super excited to get into this discussion. Welcome, Máté.
Thank you. It's great to be here. Looking forward to the chat.
As am I. So just to start off, let's see a little bit, I guess, just about your background. First off, what was your initial, introduction to Japan?
Great question.
Yeah.
I would say my first exposure to Japanese culture was through martial arts. I dabbled in all sorts of martial arts, some more seriously, starting with Japanese jiu-jitsu and then Aikido. And the last one was Brazilian jiu-jitsu, which was I was most invested in. So I guess that's only half Japanese. And as it is when you're doing practice, they count in Japanese. They use Japanese words for the techniques. So that got me initially interested. I thought it was a cool language. I'm really into languages. So that's basically it.
So you grew up in Hungary, right?
Yep, that's correct.
Okay. Where in Hungary? Was this in Budapest or somewhere else?
It's not Budapest. I'm from the second largest town in Hungary. It's called Debrecen, but it is so small compared to Budapest that basically nobody has ever heard of it. It's roughly 250,000 people, so it has a very kind of small town vibe. Everybody knows everybody else. It's in the northeast of Hungary, which gets really cold winters with a fair amount of snow. Yep.
And at that time when you were experimenting with martial arts, did you ever have any inkling that maybe you would want to live in Japan someday, or any interest in the country beyond just the martial arts and maybe the language a bit? Or how deep would you say your interest was at that point?
Not really. In fact, I wasn't really thinking that I would live overseas at all. I always thought that I was just gonna live out my entire life in my hometown. I had some really good friends with there, great community. It's a university town. So I could imagine, my parents worked at the university. I could imagine myself, pursuing an academic career there, that sort of thing. But I didn't really think very deeply about this stuff at the time. I was in high school.
Right. That's interesting because obviously, I guess you changed your mind at some point, given that you're now in Japan. But I guess before that, I would like to ask a little bit about your kind of tech background. So how did you kind of initially get interested in programming or maybe computers? What was kind of the impetus for that, that led you into this career of becoming a software engineer?
This is kind of a long story, so I'll try to keep it short and not ramble too much. I had to switch schools in third grade because I was not getting good grades in math. And I think my math teacher just really hated me. I mean, I was a little troublemaker, so this sympathy was probably mutual. And in the other school, I sort of made friends with all the nerds, the social outcasts, because I couldn't be a cool kid, being a newcomer. And one of my best friends became this guy who was really into programming, and he basically taught me the basics of programming, and we worked on a lot of cool stuff together. And then while that was sort of happening, this was in the late 90s. I guess I'm 10 or 11 years old at this point. This first-person shooters like Wolfenstein 3D, Doom, Quake and so on and so forth start coming out. First time in human history you have like real 3D gaming experiences. And the moment I saw that, I thought I want to work on that kind of stuff. And I had no idea what it would involve, that I would have to learn like all this math, which I didn't like at the time. I would have to learn about computers programming, physics for simulating interactions between objects and graphics and all this stuff. I had to learn English because all the resources were only available in English at the time. So it was kind of a wild ride, but I've just been following that passion ever since.
Wow. So it started with gaming, and
Yeah.
you decided, okay, I want to be able to make games like Doom, these FPS kind of games. And in order to do that, here's the list of things I need: English, programming, it's like physics, etc. And that kind of set you off, I guess, on this path, which had you eventually go to university. And then you decided to study computer science. But was that kind of an extension of that initial decision to become able to like make games?
I think at that point I was not even thinking about making games anymore,
Okay.
where I would end up. I just grew so fond of programming and working with computers and building the kind of like 3D interactive experiences that I could build. It really felt like magic, like you're just working with magic. And I was sort of just following the path of least resistance, going into a career of working with computers. At the time, there was no computer science degree in Hungary, so the closest available was computer engineering, which is more electrical engineering flavored. So I got to learn a lot, probably way more than I care, about the low-level workings of these machines, like a lot of physics, enough quantum mechanics to understand semiconductors, and then all the way from like digital logic through like microarchitecture, instruction set architectures to high-level programming languages. So I'm all about that stuff.
Yeah. Did you enjoy the, I guess, more abstract classes like digital logic, for example?
Yeah, I think I'm actually I tend to be a theoretically minded person. When I'm just left for my own devices, I'm really interested in things like math, abstractions, high-level cutting-edge programming languages. Yeah, I love that.
Yeah, that's cool. I actually did computer engineering myself. I remember my digital logic class. One of the tougher classes that I had, I don't know what all you guys did, but it was like Boolean algebra and like finite state machines and all that kind of fun stuff, right? Yeah. So I struggled a bit with that one, I think, but it was quite fascinating. Definitely not like anything else I had really studied. So that's really cool. So that's cool. So you already had like some practical experience, I guess, because you started actually building stuff with your friend, and then I guess you were able to cement like the more abstract, theoretical side of things through the degree. But I saw that you were in Hungary initially, but you also went to the U.S. for a bit, right?
Yeah. This is also kind of a long-winded story. I'll try to give like the key points. So like at that point, I was actually trying to get to Japan eventually. So while I was in university, I learned about a couple of things. I learned about, like the golden age of Japan, where they dominated microelectronics, semiconductors, that sort of stuff. I was really deeply into cyberpunk. My dad loves sci-fi, so I just kind of get that from him. And I thought Tokyo looked like a magical place, so I just wanted to end up here. And there was a scholarship called Vulcanus in Japan, which is like an exchange program between Japan and the European Union. And I applied, but they rejected me, ultimately saying, we can tell that you have zero international experience, so maybe Japan would be too much of a wild ride for a start. And so I was just trying to get any sort of international experience that I could. And actually it was the same friend of mine who taught me programming. We were roommates in university. He was studying electrical engineering, interestingly. And he pointed it out to me that this scholarship that was initially only open for electrical engineers also opened up for computer engineers. And I basically applied and I got in, and I had less than 3 months to sort everything out, And I still remember I just felt so confused when I was finally in Florida, landed, went to the university. It just felt like I was still in a dream.
Wow, that's awesome. So you're able to get, I guess, kind of like a dual degree kind of thing from both the university in Florida as well as from Hungary, right?
Yep.
Wow. Okay. So then you graduated with both, I guess, the practical and now the very strong theoretical kind of background as well, ready to work as a software engineer. And how did you think about because you mentioned that you already had this idea of going to Japan, right? But you didn't quite make it to Japan yet, right? You started your work as an engineer actually back in Hungary, is that right?
Yeah. Little more background information there. So the year I graduated from Florida Tech, I actually applied to Vulcanus again, and I was shortlisted, which I was really excited about. It meant I was part of maybe like a handful of people, and they wanted me to submit some more essays so that they could better place me, better match me with big companies in Japan. One of them was actually NTT Research.
Okay.
And the sort of complicating factor in the story at this point, and I feel like this is probably the largest divergence point in my life, where there's like an alternate version of me in some parallel universe that went down the other branch, where I also had an internship offer from Google. And this was beginning of summer, beginning of finals week, and I just really didn't feel like putting any more work into those essays. So, and at that point I already had the Google offer to go to the US West Coast in hand. And I got kind of lazy, and I was like, I'm just going to accept this offer, and we'll come back to this Vulcanus and Japan stuff some other time. Yeah.
Okay. Right. So that was one of the summers during your, when you're at college, you had that offer from Google and you took the opportunity. So you went so I think you did like a double kind of internship, I guess 2 years in a row, was it?
Yes.
Okay. So, and then one of those was in Mountain View as well. So you got the full Silicon Valley US kind of tech experience at Google. What was that like?
A big mixed bag of things.
Okay.
And so funnily enough, I had no intention of working in Silicon Valley. I heard stories about it, but my first internship with Google was actually in Seattle.
Right.
And it was really great. I love the Pacific Northwest. It's beautiful in the summer, great weather. And while I was there, so first thing, I could not get a sort of full-time offer at the time because I had complications with my visa situation. I basically had a visa when I studied in Florida that had these additional clauses that I would have to return and stay for 2 years in my home country after getting the degree before I could apply for a full-time work visa in the United States. So they pointed this out to me very early on during the finalization of my internship, and they were like, sorry, we can't give you a return offer, but if you want, we can give you another internship offer that's totally doable. So I took that. And I guess a big part of my experience being there was just talking with people and picking their brains about how should I shape my career. And I think one thing I found out about myself very early on is I really dislike rules and bureaucracy and red tape and all that stuff. And probably the thing that I like the least about Google is just that it's a giant corporation. It's a big company with lots of red tape everywhere. I have some war stories about this that we can come back to if we have some more time. So I figured out that as much as I love they have a very engineering-driven culture. Most of the very important decisions are just made on in the trenches of doing engineering. But they also have a lot of rules and red tape that I just didn't like. And talking to people, I figured out what I should be doing is I should try to go smaller and smaller and smaller. And a lot of people, my mentors inside of Google, and then people that I just randomly met at lunch and picked a brain, they all suggested that I should try to get to Silicon Valley because that's the mecca of this small company, startup, early stage stuff. So I was just trying to engineer my way into getting a return offer for Silicon Valley, which did work out.
Cool. So then you did an additional internship in the Mountain View office, also through Google, right? So then I guess you got to, yeah, I mean, you got to experience the Silicon Valley kind of office and everything. So how did that go?
Yeah, that was a mind-blowing experience, to be honest. I was in the ads backend part of Google, which is interesting because I believe at that time it was the only part of Google that was making money. So it's the ads backend is the part of the ads organization that is responsible for search infrastructure, serving ads, all that stuff. And I was in building 40, which is one of the 4 original buildings that Google back in the day bought from Silicon Graphics. It used to be the 4 buildings of the Silicon Graphics campus were 40, 41, 2, and 3. And Building 40 was colloquially known inside Google as the center of everything. If you watch TGIF streams from Google, they are in Charlie's Cafe that's in Building 40. So I was in there and it felt like a magical place. Everybody was about building stuff. Everything was about engineering. And it really is like a microcosm, like a little world. They had everything on campus from, cafeterias, gyms, stores that you could buy random stuff in. They had laundry machines. So I basically had friends during my internship there who were spending like 90% of the time on Google campus, never leaving. And that's certainly something they kind of want to engineer, because the longer you spend on Google campus, the more invested you become in their culture, the more you work, the more likely you are to connect with other Googlers. So it's kind of an amazing place.
Wow. So did that make it so that you wanted to work in Silicon Valley more, and that you realized like, oh, maybe this is somewhere you wanted to work for a bit longer? Or like, what was how did that kind of change your goals, I guess, experiencing that?
That made me extremely heavily invested in the idea that I would work in Silicon Valley full time. So I was putting a lot of effort into that. I also made some amazing friends. So after I moved to Mountain View for the Google internship, I made some friends outside of Google through basically by sheer chance. I got introduced by a friend to a family who were looking to rent out one of their rooms, and I just took that. They lived in Mountain View. And I became really good friends with the 2 boys who were my age, so it kind of felt like we're brothers. And through them, I got introduced to this larger group of friends who all went to high school together in Mountain View. So it really felt like I was just one of them. And they were all pretty much into like tech stuff, building things, science. And I guess for the first time in my life, I didn't feel like I was an outsider anymore. I felt like these were my people. And it was also the first sort of formative years of my adult life, where I was earning a salary for the first time in my life. I had my own, life. Had to figure out like how to do things, how to make friends, adapt to a new culture. And I think to this day that had the largest impact on my personality. So like in here, even though I have no legal connection to the US, I more than anything, I feel American.
That's very interesting. Maybe later we can contrast that to your entrance into Japan and see if it was as easy to maybe feel like you were accepted. But that is really interesting, though, that you had that experience. I mean, it makes sense. You were really into tech, and Silicon Valley, I mean, that's where the people who are super into tech, like from around the world, they all kind of congregate there. So it makes sense that it would, feel like coming home in a sense for you, right? Especially being from kind of a small town. Well, not tiny, but like a relatively small town in Budapest, right? So that's awesome that you were able to have that experience and probably clarify what you wanted to do career-wise as a result. But after that, I think perhaps due to some visa issues, you actually took a little bit of a detour and went back to Hungary for a little while. Is that right?
That's right. So I ended up taking a job at Prezi, and this sort of it's its own story again. I was enrolled at the master's program for computer science in Budapest University of Technology at that point, which again, I was just taking the path of least resistance doing that. And but while I was having my internship with Google in Mountain View, the one thing that happened that would change everything is the CTO of Prezi reached out to me because he saw me answer questions on Quora about functional programming or something like that. I was really deeply into Haskell, which is it's from I had a great professor of computer science at Florida Tech who was super into functional programming languages, and I took his course on Haskell, and that like really changed me. So anyway, I was answering questions about Haskell, and the CTO of, as he saw that, he reached out to me. And I still remember when I took his first phone call, I was sitting in a sky bridge between building 40 and 41 on Google campus. So that was kind of a surreal experience, just sitting there looking out at the people speaking Hungarian. And he basically pitched me on trying to work with them. He had the intention of putting together a team of functional programmers inside of Prezi because he heard that functional programming was going to be the next big thing, and he really wanted to experiment and figure out what kind of problems could be solved with this new technology, how that could be applied to the things that they were doing at Prezi, which were really exciting, by the way, from a lot of not just a theoretical but a practical point of view. And I sort of I didn't want to commit to things at the time, but we kept the conversation going. And once I was back in Budapest, things ramped up a little bit, and I decided to spend 2 weeks working with them after they had given me an offer. And I actually really liked a lot of the people on that team. It was called the Lambda team, very fittingly. And in fact, I enjoyed working with them so much that even though I didn't want to commit, I said like I would work part-time, explore being here a little bit while I'm trying to do my master's. Maybe about 6 months in, I realized that I had to make a decision to either go all in working full-time on all in on the master's, because I just didn't have capacity to do both. And I felt so much more engaged working with these folks inside Prezi on the Lambda team that I decided to drop out of the master's. I had a sort of come to Jesus conversation with my advisor at that time. And yeah, I just ended up at Prezi. I was there almost 2 years. They had an interesting culture that I really liked, which was teams were formed for specific purposes. So teams were not formed around like types of technology or parts of the stack or whatever. They formed to solve specific issues. And once they had solved those problems, they were disbanded, and they had like a dispersion party where they celebrated, achieving their goal, and then they got reassigned to other teams of the organization. And funny thing is that the Lambda team was the longest existing team at that point when I was there in history. So people were always kind of like teasing us about it.
So after, I guess, a couple of years of working in Hungary, you did eventually make it back to Silicon Valley. So let's quickly talk a little bit about that. You took the advice, presumably, of some of your mentors who said you should be working at like a smaller place with less red tape. And you actually went and worked at a few startups in Silicon Valley. You were actually at Quora, right? And then I believe SourceGraph and a few others. So how was that experience like, getting to actually see the full-time startup life back in the US?
In a lot of ways, it was an eye-opening experience. It made me realize like how much time I had wasted in academia trying to learn like all sorts of stuff. Because the first time, there's a saying that no plan survives first contact with the enemy. That's basically how I felt. There's just no way academic education can prepare you for like real in industry practice. And
Even
I could only, like internships are a big part of what people should do to sort of compensate for the lack of like practical knowledge in academic circles. I think it's very obvious, like as soon as you start working, you realize that you have all these blind spots that were never covered, and all the things that you thought were important, like the theory or like doing things the right way, are very low on the sort of like pyramid of needs of software engineering. Whereas things like day to day getting used to the tools that you're using. Like the first time I heard about Git and version control was my first Google internship. So that also kind of felt like a punch to the face. That there's this whole world of version control that they never really tell you about, or they don't drill you on when you're getting your education. Testing, debugging in like real world scenarios where like you'll go through playing with GDB in your terminal or whatnot, but then when you have to debug a distributed system that's deployed on like tens or hundreds of machines, like what do you do? Right. And I believe all of these things you can only really learn by doing. So you can't just read a book on like how am I going to become a good engineer, a good software developer. And long story short, I really felt like once I started doing the work and learning about all of these things, I realized that I should have optimized my career for having gone into practice earlier.
I see.
And
so
go ahead.
You essentially left your master's program early and decided that you just wanted to start working. Is that right?
Yes.
Okay. So I guess it sounds like you decided that was the right decision, because I think a lot of people have that question though of, is it better to take those extra 2 years, and get a master's, or would it be more valuable to just, leave the academia a little bit earlier, as you said, and get those 2 years of work experience instead? Is it safe to say that you have come around to the idea that you should just get the work experience first?
Yeah, I really believe that. In fact, I've gotten this exact advice multiple times from mentors that I had inside of Google and then other companies. While I had my internships, in fact, I had this exact discussion with one of the mentors I had in there, where I was like, should I do a master's, maybe a PhD, or what do I do? And this person was telling me they strongly believed that if your end goal is to be in academia, then sure, go into academia and climb the ladder, go through all of that. But if your end goal is to do work in industry, work as an engineer or software developer, then don't bother going into academia. It's not really going to help you. It might even teach you sort of counterproductive habits that work in academia, but they don't work in engineering.
Interesting. Yeah.
On the bright side, I always felt like when I decided to change jobs in Silicon Valley, it was extremely easy to find another, maybe even way better paying job, because the job market there is just so liquid. There's so much talent, and there's also so much demand for talent.
Yeah.
Obviously, things have changed over the 6+ years that I've been away, so maybe it is a little different now, but it still feels like, especially if you're running your own company and you're trying to build stuff that needs high quality talent, the best place on earth to find that is still Silicon Valley.
Yeah, I can definitely see that. I mean, there are definitely good and bad times to be searching for a job, right? But the average level of liquidity, I think, is very high. Like you said, if you have like good tech skills, there are going to be a lot of options, so that is the good side of it, I think. But you can get unlucky timing wise, right? I mean, the downturns are when the layoffs are happening too. So it's when the most people have that issue, right? So it's I can definitely see how it would cause a lot of anxiety as well. So after a while of working in the US, it seems like you, I guess, got interested in Japan once again, and you evidently made your way to Japan to work at a robotics company called Ascent Robotics. So can you tell me a little bit about, I guess, how that came about, and like what that search process was like that finally got you back to finding a job here in Tokyo.
Yeah, absolutely. So like I mentioned, by following this path of least resistance, I worked mostly on run-of-the-mill internet stuff, like backend infrastructure, what have you. But my background, my specialization at Budapest University of Technology was actually intelligent systems. That's like adjacent to things like robotics. And I was really interested in that sort of stuff. And I also at that point in my life, I just felt too comfortable. And that was scaring me a little bit. I felt like maybe I'm not pushing myself enough, living up to my potential. I was trying to did a little bit of soul searching, and I decided that I would go and try to find a way to go back to my roots, which is like robotics intersecting with artificial intelligence, sort of mission critical software where correctness really matters. So I was shopping around in the Bay Area, talking to people. I had friends who worked at Cruise, Lyft, all these big names. Uber was still in the business of self-driving at the time. And through connection, there's another Hungarian guy that him and I were in the same lab in Florida Tech, in the same program. I knew that he was in Japan, and through him I had this connection to sand robotics. So once I was like, I should work on self-driving cars, that seemed like a good cause. A lot of people die in traffic accidents each year, and we kind of just were like brushing it under the carpet. But there's probably something we can do there. So self-driving looked like a good cause to save lives, work on interesting stuff, cutting edge robotics. And how this all came to be, this Japan stuff, what got my interest in Japan reignited is while I was doing all this soul searching and I had some connections with self-driving companies in the Bay Area, I went on a vacation and I came to Tokyo for the first time. It was my first time in Asia, first time in Japan, first time in Tokyo. And I was just here for 3 weeks. And I really loved the place, and I realized that one thing that made my life not super exciting in the Bay Area is that it's a big suburban environment, Like there's San Francisco, but it's like a 7 by 7 square mile, piece of land. It's tiny, and the rest of the Bay Area, including the South Bay, the East Bay area, is pretty suburban. And then I was here in Tokyo, and it was just mind-blowing, it's much more dense, much better connected in terms of public transport. There were so many things to do, to see. Every part of Tokyo feels like has its own character. So it's just kind of, and I mentioned I was really into cyberpunk. So all of that thrown into the mix of me trying to figure out what to do next with having this connection, and all the stars aligned. These three things came together that I had an opportunity to work on self-driving, move to Japan, and work at a small startup. So I just took it. I didn't really think very hard about it. In fact, I feel like I took too long. At that point, my last job in the Bay Area was at Coursera, and I was a tech lead on a fairly big refactoring project. So I gave them 3 months notice because I didn't want to screw people over.
Right.
And it was just amazing. I feel like I got the visa so quickly. People have these ideas in their mind that Japan is very strict on immigration, so it must be very difficult to immigrate into Japan. And what I found is that it depends very heavily on what kind of path you're taking. And I felt like for me, as an engineer, as a software worker, immigrating into Japan was way easier than immigrating into the US.
A very interesting story. So you actually experienced Tokyo, and you realized that it was very different from the Bay Area in a lot of ways that maybe impacted you, like having the ability to, I guess, use public transportation to get around, not needing a car, because I know in the Bay Area it's very much a car-centered kind of lifestyle. I'm also not a big fan of that myself either. I think it's one of the big perks of Tokyo, you can still get around super quickly. The public transportation makes the city feel a lot smaller than it is, but you don't need a car at all. So that is one of the nicest things, I think. So you had that, and also maybe just some novelty, getting to see the different culture and everything, I guess. So you happened upon that right around the time when you were deciding what to do. And you said you didn't think too deeply about it. It was just like the stars kind of aligned. It was the kind of work you wanted to do. I guess it was an English environment. Were you at all concerned, I guess, about like the level of like technology? Because I think maybe one possible point of apprehension that people have is that if they go to Japan, it's going to like kind of hold them back technically compared to somewhere like Corsair, where presumably it's like a cutting edge Silicon Valley startups are using the latest technologies. And I think some people have this concern that maybe if I go to Japan, it's going to be like maybe more like outdated tech, or like if I want to go back to Silicon Valley at some point, they might not have heard about the companies that I worked for or really understand the experience I got there. Like, was that on your mind at all or no?
Not really.
Not so much.
I
Okay.
can't say. And I can tell you why. My initial plan was to stay in Japan for 2 years tops and then just go back to the Bay Area and resume what I was doing. And I had a lot of friends at that point who had taken extensive career breaks. So I was kind of just thinking, like, even if it's a total disaster in terms of career progression or anything else, I can just write it off as a really long career break and go back to Silicon Valley and pick up where I had left off.
I think that's a great way to look at it. Worst case scenario, you have a year or two, it's not a gap exactly, but like a period of time where maybe the person looking at your resume next, if you go back to the US, wouldn't necessarily know exactly what kind of stuff you're working on or whatever, but like it wouldn't hurt you. And, maybe if it goes well, you could stay, right? And but that is evidently what you've chosen to do. But so you mentioned getting an visa was super easy. And was that just because the company basically just took care of that for you? I'm assuming it was an engineering visa, or was it like a highly skilled professional visa, or like which visa was it?
I had the normal engineering visa.
Okay.
Initially, I had it for like 1 year, maybe.
Okay. And the company just took care of that basically for you?
Pretty much. But I would say what makes me say that the process is easy, I think it's more the contrast. That getting the work visa to work in the US was so difficult. Like getting the H-1B, the company again took care of most things for me, but I still had to do like a lot of paperwork on my own end, go in for several interviews at the consulate in Budapest. Then obviously there's a lottery, so even if you you jump through all the hoops, you have all the qualifications, you meet like all the standards, there are still so many people applying every year for so few spots that they have to hold a lottery, so you also have to be lucky. And it basically took over a year of getting green lighted that I knew I could move, which is like a kind of it wears you down. And I can imagine that, like people who don't get lucky, like I did in the H-1B lottery, it's kind of a soul-crushing experience, because at that point you've invested so much of your time and resources into getting this thing, and then somebody just doesn't draw your number, and that's it. You can't appeal, you can't do anything about it. Compare that to, I think I had no interviews for getting the Japanese engineering visa. I just had to go to the Japanese embassy in San Francisco one time. Wait time was super short. There was like basically zero hassle, just submit the paperwork. The lady told me like, you need to come back in, I don't know, 2 weeks or whatever, or we'll notify you. And then the next time I was back there, they were putting the stamp in my passport, and that was it.
That's awesome. Yeah, the contrast is really interesting, actually. I mean, my experience was similar. It almost felt like a formality. It didn't even enter my mind that like, oh, this might not work. Like I might not get approved. It's more like if you have a company to sponsor you and whatever, whether it's a college degree or like 10 years of experience, there's a few different ways to kind of become eligible for a visa. But as long as you have those, it's kind of like guaranteed pretty much, unless there's like some major issue or you have like some criminal past or anything like that, right? So yeah, I never really thought about how much more carefree of a process it is. So that must have felt good after, like, having just been through the US process. Was it like shocking, like kind of how easy it was?
Yeah, that was really surprising.
Right.
I feel like every time, even if you have the right visa or you have a green card or whatever, when you're entering the United States as a foreigner, they take like a really long, hard look at you, and they make you sort of feel it. They make you feel that, yeah, like we're really checking everything here, you know, like. Whereas, and I expected Japan to be the same way because of all the stories that you hear about Japan, and it was just a completely opposite experience.
Wow, that's awesome. So I guess that helped you have, I guess, start off on a positive. I mean, start off on the right foot here in Japan, because that was easy at least. But did you have any other, I guess, points of friction when it came to actually moving here? Like, for example, when it came to getting an apartment or opening a bank account or any of that stuff, or did that go pretty smoothly as well?
In the grand scheme of things, it went relatively smoothly. I think what makes me say that is that I'm from a former Eastern Bloc country, so we have our own flavor of bureaucracy. And I would say the difference between the flavor of bureaucracy that we have in Hungary and the flavor of bureaucracy that exists in Japan is that the Japanese one works, where so you know it's going to take a lot of paperwork and people sending you like go to that window, do this, do that, but in the end stuff will get done. Whereas in like the Hungarian one, sometimes you're being sent in circles and it just doesn't really work. So I was kind of prepared for that as an Eastern European, and I had to deal with a couple of these deadlocks of to get a bank account, you need to have a residential address, but to get the residential address with the apartment, you need to have a bank account. I mean, you have to break these loops somehow, but I was kind of prepared for that. Apart from that, I don't remember anything else that was like particularly difficult.
Wow. So you were able to get an apartment. That wasn't too big of a stumbling block.
Yeah. I would say I probably pulled the trigger too early on like the first, I think I flew in on what I thought was going to be Thursday, but it was actually Friday because you lose one day flying here from California. So it was a little bit of a surprise when my alarm rang in the morning. Like I flew to Tokyo like 2 a.m. and then my alarm rang at 7, and that's when I realized like I have to go to work now to actually report. So that was terrible. And then over the weekend I checked out 5 apartments through an agency that caters specifically to foreigners, and I just picked one. And looking back, it was probably a little bit of a ripoff. You know, it came with like the gaijin tax added on top. Nice. And I ended up sort of hating the place that I had for the next 2 years or so. Right. It was very tiny, didn't have a lot of natural light coming in because of a like taller building in front, even though it had a balcony and all that. And I mean, it's also just my place in California used to be so large that probably my entire apartment in Tokyo was smaller than what my living room used to be in California. Right. So there was like a lot to unpack there. But on a brighter note, I also feel like I was only using my apartment for sleeping. In like the first 2 years, I was always either at work or I was out like socializing people, making friends, enjoying all the sights and things that Tokyo has to offer.
Totally. I think when you're young and single, especially, like potentially one downside of Tokyo is that the apartments are pretty small, especially compared to the US, because as you mentioned, it's much denser and everything. But I had a similar kind of experience where I was in a very tiny apartment. But as long as you're okay with a small space, you can, live pretty much anywhere in the city, including like the kind of top neighborhoods. Like I had a place 2 minutes from like Nakameguro Station, which is like one of the top kind of neighborhoods, and it was not expensive at all, like less than $1,000 a month. it was tiny, but I feel like how tiny it was may have even helped me be a bit more social in that sense. Cause like I didn't really want to go home. So I would like maybe stay out a little bit longer and maybe do things, outside the apartment more and like make use of being in that nice neighborhood and everything. So early on, when you are a bit on the younger side, I think it's a really great kind of trade-off that you can make. As you grow older, you tend to want more space and it can be a bit more of an issue, I would say. Has that kind of been your experience as well? Or like, how do you think about like housing in Japan or in Tokyo specifically now?
I would say the main factor that I see can make a huge difference is if you can work remotely. If you find a remote job, either inside Japan or outside, outside probably even better if you're not getting paid in yen this moment in time, then you can move further out from the city center. And I hear that drastically lowers your rent.
Yeah.
And that's probably your highest cost, right?
Yeah.
Day to day.
I completely agree. Yeah.
Every time I think about this, I'm like, if I get to a point where I feel like the rent is really stinging, then I should just do that.
Yeah.
Move further out, find a remote job, move into consulting, that sort of stuff.
Yep. If you are like relatively senior, you're pretty established in your career, you can always, at least with like a background like you have, I think that's always an option. You can, it's just like I said, it's a trade-off. You can get more space further away, and if you're commuting, then like that has its own kind of set of trade-offs and everything. Whereas if you're working from home, then it matters less. And, it's a kind of equation that you can just decide what you want to prioritize yourself, right? Cool. So let's talk a little bit about your actual work at the startup that you joined, Ascent Robotics. You, I guess, were working in like a pretty international environment, it sounds like, because you mentioned that you had a friend who told you about it. And would you say that the environment was actually like pretty similar to what you had in Silicon Valley, or were there any kind of quirks maybe that are unique to Japan, or like what was the actual environment like?
I would say the environment was pretty similar in the sense of, it's being very international, lots of different personalities, different like strengths and weaknesses. What made a huge difference, I felt, was that compared to a Silicon Valley technology organization, everything felt very unorganized. I would say arriving, like my take was that the leadership was incompetent. They just had no idea how to run a high-functioning technology company. And so it was extremely frustrating at times because I felt like we had a lot of great talent and we had great opportunity of, like being here in Japan. And it felt like all of that was just going to waste because the company leadership couldn't figure out their game plan, essentially.
I see. So there is, I guess there are a few different sides to the company. There's like the business side of like, is the business model viable? Are they able to, sell a product that the people want, make revenue, et cetera, make profit? And then there's like the technological side of things of like the engineering organization. Would you say that the part that you took issue with was one of those only, or was it both? Or like, how did that go?
I would say nothing was perfect. So both sides had issues. On the engineering side, things were just less organized than your average Silicon Valley engineering organization. But like Silicon Valley engineering organizations are sort of top of the food chain. So I was not expecting that. And there were a lot of quirks that I feel like I could have lived with. But on the management side, so to clarify, Ant Robotics was still pre-product market fit when I had joined. And what I saw in Silicon Valley is that when you're pre-product market fit, the only thing you need to do is you need to find product market fit, and you just repeat these cycles of like come up with an idea that is basically a proposal for like a value offering. And then you build some sort of prototype or demo of that to show it to customers, you get their feedback. If they don't bite, you throw it in the dustbin and you start the cycle again. And you just rinse and repeat until something sticks, and then that's your product market fit. and then you ramp up scale on that. You start getting like more and more investment money, you scale it out, end of story. So Ascent was also pre-product market fit, but I did not feel like we were executing this cycle at all. And it always felt like even if we had, like we tried to build something, it was kind of like a half-assed attempt, but then there was also no honest evaluation of like, is this something that will stick? Are the users biting on this? And at that point, you know, like even if you know this is something that doesn't stick, somebody from like upper management has to come in and they have to say these hard things of like, that was basically a failure that didn't work, so we're gonna try something else. And I felt what was really not helpful, and this might be like a Japanese cultural thing, is I felt like admitting that something was a failure, that something didn't work, never explicitly happened, because in Japanese culture, failure is seen as something extremely bad. Like they think that you cannot recover from failure. You know, you like brought dishonor to your family or whatever, and you have to like disembowel yourself with your sword, kind of mindset. And
Not
I
literally
think it really
anymore,
doesn't work.
but yeah. I
Sure, obviously, I'm exaggerating.
Yeah, no, but like, yeah, I think there's still aspects to that culture that persist now, including in the business world. So I completely know what you mean. Yeah.
And that means that prevents this sort of exploration cycle from happening. And it just means like you're stuck with one or two ideas that you're constantly trying to push. And maybe you try like different iterations of that idea, but it really limits what you can do in this product market discovery phase.
Right.
And that was just extremely frustrating.
Wow. That's super interesting. Because yeah, I completely agree. Like when you're pre-product market fit, the goal, there's only one goal, and it's to get product market fit. And the way you do that is by trying as many different things as you can, as quickly as you can, right? And that's the other part of it. So if you're afraid to admit when one of the iterations has failed, then that lengthens the time that you spend on that iteration and slows you down, gives you fewer bites at the apple, decreases the chances that you're going to ultimately be successful, right? And you felt like there was a lot more willingness to kind of admit that and go quickly and therefore find the right product market fit in Silicon Valley than you had at least this particular company here in Tokyo?
Oh yeah, definitely. I can give you concrete examples. So when I was at SourceGraph, I feel like within a span of less than 2 months, we must have tested more than 4 ideas. And I also worked on just cranking out lots of different prototypes. So we had like this one idea that maybe for background, SourceGraph, they're in code search, indexing, and intelligence. Now they're very heavily getting into the whole like large language model stuff. You know, they certainly have the data to execute on this very well. So back then, this was not clear at all. We were still in the discovery phase when I was there. And one idea was that maybe the key is to give end users really good editor integrations so that you get all these search results, you can execute search queries from your editor. And I churned out a couple of prototypes for different editors, and that was very interesting. But what made me learn the most probably is that at the end, somebody stood up and they said, we tried this and there's no traction. It doesn't seem to be making a difference. So all of this is just going to be thrown away and we're going to try something else. Wow. And you know, the first couple of times you go through that, it's kind of a soul-crushing experience because you want to see the thing that you built, it's your baby, you want to see it live. But that doesn't work from a business perspective. Like if something that doesn't work, you can't just double down on it. You have to admit that the reality is it doesn't work and try to change something or try something completely different. So yeah, like I guess I'm just describing pivoting on a micro scale inside the org.
Wow. That's really interesting that you saw that kind of contrast between the two. So you mentioned that like the level of the people that you were working with and like the technical skills and everything, would you say were pretty much on par with what you saw in the US? It was just more of like a question of like the management, things like that, that maybe were not as up to the standard, I guess, that you expected?
One difference I would highlight that I think makes it's a very important factor in terms of how an engineering organization, how well it can function and innovate, is American, or at least in Silicon Valley, engineering organizations are very much about hierarchy, very top down. So information propagates upwards in the tree. Decisions are made at the top or as high up as they need to be made, depending on what type of decision is, whether it's like, like business strategy or like more like tactical stuff on the engineering level. And then these decisions propagate downwards from the tree. And once a decision has been made, people stop questioning that decision. They like stop fighting it, because when they were supposed to give their input was in the phase that was preceding the decision. So like their input was taken, it was valued, and then maybe it was even if they would have made a different decision, people will fall in line. I guess the short way to describe this is, I heard one of the Amazon values is disagree and commit.
Right.
And I think that's really valuable, because you have to execute. Like you can't argue at the whiteboard forever about details that you're unhappy with in a design or whatever. And often the best way, it's impossible to validate ideas at the whiteboard. You have to build stuff. And once you build stuff, those prototypes have enough detail that they can make contact with reality, that you find out, like, is this idea valuable or not?
Right.
Whereas I feel like in Ascent, but I've seen this in other Japanese organizations, I think there's too much of like Japanese organizations rely very heavily on just consensus building. And maybe that is super helpful if you need to make decisions that are very hard to reverse or back out of. So like if you're building hardware, like your Toyota, and your iteration cycle on a vehicle is like 4. And maybe that is super helpful if you need to make decisions that are very hard to reverse or back out of. So like if you're building hardware, like your Toyota, and your iteration cycle on a vehicle is like 4 to 5 years. You have to make sure that the decisions that you make early on are the right decisions. So it's probably this sort of like consensus building, or namawashi as the Japanese call it. It's like very helpful there. But I feel like this is sort of antithetical to building software, because in software, the real specification of what the thing needs to do is the software itself. The only way to find out what the specification needs to be is to build these prototypes, these straw man that you can tear apart, that you can bring into contact with reality, and that way you learn about all their flaws, you learn about all their strengths, and then you iterate. And because in software, these decisions that are hard to back out of are very rare. It costs nothing to just start new or take some piece and replace other parts. I think this sort of consensus building there is way less effective than just sort of propagating information up the tree, making decisions, propagating it back down, and then you're not really questioning, and it comes with this idea that the person who holds decision-making authority, they also have the responsibility. So if the decision turns out to be a bad decision, they hold the responsibility for that.
Right. Whereas, I guess with the nemawashi kind of Japanese way of consensus-based decision-making, no one really holds the responsibility.
Yeah.
Do you see that as an issue? Yeah.
Yeah. So there you can't really, I don't want to say assign blame, but the part of the organization that has, when you make a wrong decision or a suboptimal decision, why does that happen? That happens because your mental model, or the sort of collective mental model of the organization about your business domain or your user or whatever is slightly wrong. It has like discrepancy. So when you learn from a mistake, you learn like that was not the right decision, what is supposed to happen is you update this mental model, this collective mental model. So when the decision was made by a single person, it's easy for them to see like this was my fault, so this is how I'm going to update my mental model. This is how I'm going to change my mind about this thing. Excuse me. But when, like you said, when that sort of authority is kind of diffuse, it's hard to see like why that particular decision was made. Everybody can just brush it aside of like, oh, I didn't decide that. We decided that as a group. Then right. I think this learning, this adjusting of priors is much less likely to happen.
Interesting. Yeah. And so you've experienced a few different tech companies here. So you were at Ascent first, which again, top startup, had lots of funding, and I haven't really followed them in the last few years, to be honest. But I know they were considered like kind of one of the top places to work there for a bit. And then you were at Woven Planet. I guess now it's called Woven by Toyota, which is kind of a, division within Toyota that's very focused on like autonomous vehicles and various other like, they're building like a smart city also, and just like super cutting edge kind of tech within Toyota. And then after that, you were at Braid Technologies, I guess, right? And again, another like, I feel like they were kind of in stealth for a while. I didn't fully understand what they were working on, but had a lot of like, again, top people, a lot of interest from investors and things like that. So you've been at like some very interesting companies here, all like very international for Japan. And would you say that some of these issues that you're pointing out were shared by kind of all of these organizations, or were any of them like kind of, I guess, specific just to Ascent, or like how do you kind of think about these now, having worked for 3 different companies, I guess?
Interesting question. I try not to sort of generalize right. in this way. There's this line that every happy family is happy in the same way, and every unhappy family is broken in its own way. I think right. it tends to be the same with engineering organizations. Mm-hmm. And as much as I think there is some cultural aspect. So like right. I would say Ascent and Woven were more on the Japanese sort of cultural side in a way. They were like their internal cultures and decision-making structures were very heavily influenced by Japanese culture. Okay. I also have to say that that was never the most important factor in whenever there was dysfunction. It was never this like cultural dimension. Maybe right. it didn't help to make things better, but so for example, I would say in Woven, the most important factor in the organization not being super effective was, and this actually surprised me because I went in with the belief that it was going to be the cultural dimension that was going to be the most important. But what turned out to be the major rift inside Woven was software people and hardware people not being able to see eye to eye, because they live in worlds that are so different, and they have to connect these 2 worlds to solve the problems that are global to the organization. So, like software people want short iteration cycles. This sort of like, they see decisions as essentially 2-way doors. Every decision is easy to back out of. If you learn it's not the right decision, you screw something up, you can push an update and it's sorted out. Whereas on the hardware people, they have long iteration cycles. Building prototypes to actually test stuff is expensive. They have to figure out supply chains, and there's all this stuff, right? And I can't really think of a single theme from my experience here that I would say that's the silver bullet that would improve all of these organizations.
Right. But I mean, I think that also kind of shows that, being in Japan is not going to like majorly maybe hold you back as an engineer. Like if you're concerned that, the culture is different, therefore like it's not a place I want to work, like it'll not be a good place for me, I won't be able to grow there or whatever. It sounds like the bottleneck to, these companies being successful and growing was never this like common thread of like the culture, that was more just like one relatively small aspect of it. Whereas at the end of the day, there's just these things that would happen in any country, like the friction between hardware and software people who just have different priorities, and maybe it's just certain people in different positions, whether it's like someone in management who is, not doing what they need to be or whatever it is, which can happen in the US or Japan, right? So I think it sounds like at least being in Japan, even if you faced some issues in certain at certain points, like it wasn't Japan that was like the key issue, right?
Yeah, I have a lot of friends here who are recruiters, and one peculiar thing that I always hear repeated is that whenever they are looking for high performing like software people, they tend to look at foreigners more because they say Japan just doesn't have good software engineers. And I know for a fact that is not true. There are lots of great Japanese software engineers. I used to work with some of them in Silicon Valley. I think what happens and what is a big problem for Japan is that these people leave for overseas because they speak good English, they have the technology skills to succeed outside of Japan.
Right.
And they end up in places like Silicon Valley, Europe, probably Singapore, I don't know. And I see that as a problem that Japan should try to address. Actually, the first thing I heard about this was when I worked with Singaporean people in Silicon Valley. And one thing they told me that really surprised me is that being an engineer in Asia or in East Asian cultural circles, like China, Korea, Japan, so on and so forth. So being an engineer here is not seen as a prestige profession. It's seen as more like a white collar kind of stuff. And they
like
told
like
me,
a blue collar, right?
Sorry, blue collar, yeah.
Yeah.
So they said like the high ranking, like on the cultural ladder of importance professions are doctor, lawyer, and banker.
Right.
And I think that is really hurting. This cultural view is really hurting Japan.
Yeah.
I don't know if it's hurting other countries like China or Korea because I haven't experienced those, but I can tell you this is really hurting Japan. And if there was a genie that I could just ask to change this, that's the one thing I would ask to change about Japan.
I do think that is improving. I think like compared to like 10 years ago or whatever, it's a little bit better. There's some more interest in, teaching kids programming and, things like that. There've been some good examples of companies that have come out and done really well, startups that have like had these big IPOs and stuff like that. So I think it's starting to change a bit, but you're right though, that like, at least historically, that's been very true. And it still persists, I think, to this day. So that's something I'm trying to work on as well, like with Japan Dev, just showing these companies that kind of get the value and know that it is like a very professional career and not like something that anyone can just do or something that you're supposed to do for like a year or two to pay your dues first and then grow out of or anything like that, So yeah, that's something that we still face and that we're still kind of fighting against, I think. But I do think we're making progress though.
What are some of the opportunities or levers that you see that could be used to change that?
Yeah, I mean, that's tough. I feel like a lot of it's just kind of like a PR issue, like I mentioned, there have been a few kind of like headline IPOs. Like, for example, the company I used to work for, Mercari, had like I think at the time it was like $7 or $8 billion kind of IPO. That was very eye-opening for people, I think, because they were like, wow, like you can just like start this like tech company, and within like 5 or 6 years go do this IPO and like make all this money. And I was hoping that there'd be some more examples of those, like more decacorns and things like that, which hasn't quite happened yet. There've been like more and more like kind of unicorns, like $1 billion+ valuation, private companies coming out and things like that. But I think, yeah, that's a big part of it. It's just like examples of like success cases of like, I feel like in the US from a long time ago, we had these like stories of like Mark Zuckerberg was in his, like in his Harvard dorm room and he just like typed some stuff into a computer and they, went public, whatever, some number of years later. And when they did, there were 1,000 millionaires created as a result, right? Like 1,000 people became millionaires on one day because some guy in a dorm room decided to write some code. And I feel like that we maybe just had some more time to understand that concept in the US. And there are just more of those big examples. Now there are like $1 trillion level companies where Japan doesn't have anything like that yet. But I think once there's maybe the first like $100 billion one, then I think more and more people will see and they can kind of follow the money and just be like, okay, wow, this is actually a really valuable thing to do. Like tech, internet-enabled kind of tech can actually be super valuable because I think that's still not been fully proven yet You know what I mean? Since there is no Japanese Facebook or Google or anything at that level yet. So I think that's the first step is just, fund startups, more and more startups, get more and more chances to have like more of those bigger outcomes. And then once we have those, then I think that'll attract more and more people. And then it's kind of a cycle from there. Yeah.
That makes sense. More role models, more success stories.
Yeah. And then too, like also when there is like a big outcome like that, a lot of there have, for example, like PayPal, there's like the PayPal mafia and like all these people who went off and then started their own things and became $1 billion+ companies. And it's like, it starts this like flywheel, I think. And it's just been kind of slow to get rolling, but I'm hoping that that will get more and more traction here in Japan also. Because it has, a lot of, a lot going for it. Tokyo especially, like tons of people would love to live in Japan. It's such a carefree place to live, such a great lifestyle, pretty good cost of living and everything for the size of the city that it is and everything. Super safe, great history, culture, great food, amazing food, right? Like I think if we can, the language is an issue, of course. So there's like some downsides too. But I think that, I'm more bullish than ever on Tokyo. And there have been a lot of like positive things happening in the community too. Like the amount of like VC funding has gone up a lot. I think it has plateaued a bit actually in the last couple of years, but like compared to like 10 years ago, it's I think increased by like like an order of magnitude basically. So there's more and more startups, more chances potentially for people who want to start companies here and stuff like that too. So I think we're on the right trajectory, but it's not easy.
Yes, fingers crossed. And time to do the work.
Yeah, exactly. But I know that you're doing some stuff in the community also. You mentioned Rust earlier, and you run a community actually, like a meetup for Rust called Tokyo Rust. And I guess I'm curious, like, why you decided to get into that and like how that's kind of going.
That's right. I've been organizing the Tokyo Rust community since for over 2 years now.
Nice.
And when I moved here, I felt like one big thing that was missing is these sort of communities of builders or communities who are excited about something. So like the South Bay of the San Francisco Bay Area has tons of these hacker spaces. They're literally just everywhere. So like when I lived there, there was multiple of these that I frequented on a weekly basis. There was Hacker Dojo that I really fondly remember just meeting people there. Not even just building stuff, but like also just socializing. There was Silicon Valley Virtual Reality, SVVR, that was just literally down the street from where I lived in Mountain View. It was a great place. And I was going to the Haskell meetup, obviously. So after I had moved here, I felt like there was a general lack of that. And I realized that, just be the change that you want to see in the world. So I started looking, and I actually did not start the Tokyo Rust meetup. I kind of inherited that. I think the original people sort of stepped down because they started their own companies. They got like other responsibilities. And the meetup group was in limbo during COVID. They had no events whatsoever. And once the lockdowns were lifted, I was looking again, and the system started sending out these automated messages of, hey, this meetup group is on the verge of being deleted unless somebody steps up to be the leader. And I was really contemplating that. I was thinking like, surely somebody else will do it. And the last time I looked at it, it was 1 hour before deletion, and I was about to go to lunch with my coworkers. So I decided, hey, I'm just gonna click this button here, pay the money, and then later on I'll find somebody else to run it. And I'm still looking, and I've just been running it myself with the help of a couple of friends who are like very much engaged with Rust. I feel like it's a great community. I made a lot of amazing connections through the Tokyo Rust meetup. Met a lot of people who are passionate about the same things that I am. That's probably why they gravitated towards Rust. At the moment, I feel like we hit some sort of a plateau where, or maybe I'm just not good at like delegating responsibilities, but I'm always looking for people to get involved. I'm trying to sort of extract myself out of it without making it collapse.
So if anyone is interested in taking the reins, maybe helping to run the Tokyo Rust meetup, they should probably reach out to you, it sounds like.
Yeah, definitely.
Okay.
I'd be happy to also just build like a stronger core community. So far, we've been having regular talks. I try to have one once a month or once every 2 months. We have a YouTube channel where we've been very rigorously like just uploading edited videos of the talks so people can watch them later. But there's probably a lot more opportunities for community building along the lines of like having hackathons together, having lightning talks, more lighthearted, just meet at a bar, pub, and talk about Rust kind of stuff. So I'm just hoping that there's going to be more of this like grassroots movement type of things instead of me and the couple of other people who are heavily involved always have to like push for things to happen.
I do think that Rust has been growing here in Japan. I mean, it's still relatively small, I guess, compared to some, maybe like Golang, Ruby, JavaScript, things like that. But I think the popularity is growing. I'm seeing more positions using Rust. So maybe you will have some more success, finding a larger group as it gains popularity. And yeah, I think it's an awesome group, a great thing that you're basically creating for the community, and very valuable. So I hope you're able to keep it going and maybe find someone to help out more with it. But yeah, so yeah, overall, it sounds like you have had various experiences, and you've seen kind of everything, from like the U.S. Silicon Valley way of doing things to how it works now in Japan at a few different companies, to also your experience back in Hungary. And I guess my question to you would be like, given all of that, like your path so far, what would maybe like you tell someone who is not sure where they want to start their career? Like if they want to work in Silicon Valley, or do they want to just come to Japan, or if they want to be in Europe, like, is there like an archetype, that would make the most sense to just work in Japan versus the US versus one for Europe? Or like, what are kind of the most important questions that you would maybe ask yourself when deciding like where would be the right place to start a career, given that you've kind of experienced all three?
That's an interesting question you're touching on. I tend to be extremely hesitant when giving advice to people because it puts you in a really powerful position to influence somebody's life, and you don't really have skin in the game, right? But the one advice I would give is maybe just a change of mindset. Like what I came to believe is that no place is perfect. No place or company is in an absolute sense better than some other place. It's all about, as you were kind of just touching on, it's all about how good of a match is the place where you live or you work for you as a person, for your personality type, your interests, what you value. And I would say if you would frame it this way, figuring out like where you want to live, what kind of company you want to work for is a process of self-discovery. And I think I approach this the same way I approach other problems, which is try things out, experiment. You have to spend some amount of time to sort of get the data so you can make a good decision. This is exactly, I guess this goes back to what I was saying earlier, that I feel like I spend too much time on trying to learn stuff from books and from other people. And the reason that never works is there are 8 billion of us and we're all unique. We have unique biases, strengths and weaknesses. And what really matters is to figure out like what works for you. And nobody else can tell you that. No book can tell you that. And the best way to figure it out is just try lots of different things, like go live in other countries, learn foreign languages, try different jobs and see how they make you feel. And then just double down as you grow older and older, double down on the things that work and make you feel good and get rid of everything else.
Wow. I think that's great advice. So don't be afraid to try some different things, maybe, and collect some data and make an informed decision, right? Yeah, that makes a lot of sense. So I guess looking back at your own path, do you feel like there is? I mean, I think you touched on the question of like amount of time spent in academia versus getting practical work experience. Maybe you would have, I guess ratcheted the dial up a bit more toward the practical side of things. But are there any other kind of changes maybe that you would make to the way that you did things, or like maybe just I don't know, not exactly regrets, but just like things that you would have maybe done differently?
I think maybe I'm also giving this advice of try to get to know yourself early on, because I feel like looking back, I didn't really do a good job at that, and I felt like for some time, even during my career, I was trying to be like I was trying to live somebody else's life. Like I was trying to live a life that other people would think is valuable, like earn a lot of money, do stuff that maybe don't make you feel happy, they don't make you feel good inside, but they are an expression of the expectations that society puts on you of like what kind of life a person should have. And I think that's a mistake. Like if you feel like you're not being true to yourself, then just don't do it.
I see. Actually question what you want to do. Don't just I don't know, don't just do things because you think that's what you're supposed to do, right? Like actually test. Right.
Don't follow somebody else's script.
Right. I think that's great advice. So yeah, I mean, I guess my only other question is like maybe what is next? Like, I think that you mentioned that you had actually left your full-time position as a software engineer and we're now kind of looking at what to do next. Is there anything you can maybe share about your plans, like what you're kind of thinking about looking forward? Do you think you'll be in Japan for the time being? And like, if so, what do you think that you'll be up to? Like, what is the next kind of step for you, do you think?
Well, I'm in Japan indefinitely. I really love the country. I like it here. Like I said, no place is perfect. There's ups and downs. It has pros and cons of living here, but I like it. I've been trying to go back again to my roots of working on robotics and AI and recent developments in embodied AI. I feel like embodied AI is just a rebrand for robotics, by the way. So I'm just going to say robotics.
Okay.
Recent developments in robotics make me really excited. It's obvious that the type of technology that underpin large language models, it's also applicable to robotics. Is just maybe we don't have the data or there is something else missing there. And I'm saying this because I'm really excited about technology in general. I would call myself, I'm a techno optimist, for better or worse. I used to be I still am really bullish on VR. Some of the books like cyberpunk sci-fi that I read as a little kid, like Neuromancer is one of them. They're all about things like VR. And even though I feel like I'm optimistic about technology, I still underestimate how quickly change is happening. So for example, I never thought that this VR stuff that is happening right now, where you have things like the Vision Pro, that I thought we would not have that in my lifetime. Wow. But we do. It is happening. And I'm pretty sure it's going to be the same with robotics, that in a very short amount of time, we're going to make huge leaps and advances in robotics that will enable robots to have as complex behaviors as we normally associate with other animals, like cats and dogs and so on and so forth. And so I'm just excited about working on that and figuring out how I can contribute to this push that is happening.
Wow. Well, I love your mindset of starting with kind of the technology and then asking like, how can I influence it? And like, I guess, provide the most value, it sounds like, right? And, I think that's a really great way to look at it. And I think you're a true technologist. And I'm definitely excited to see what you're able to kind of make happen in that space. I don't know if you're looking to start your own company or, join a company that is in that space or what. but I'm sure that if anyone wants to kind of talk to you about that kind of space, they can definitely reach out to you. I think you are probably a wealth of knowledge about that. And it sounds like a really interesting topic actually to discuss. But yeah, that sounds awesome though.
I'm always happy to chat about this.
Cool. Well, I think that's pretty much it for my questions. We went extremely far over time, and I'm very sorry about that, but I got kind of lost in the conversation. It was really fascinating actually to hear, your path so far. I'm glad that you're still here thriving in Japan, in the ecosystem here, that, you're still kind of contributing, because I think your, like I said, knowledge is going to be incredibly valuable to the community, whether it's through your events and stuff like that or your work. I'm glad that you have had a good, time of it here in Japan, and will continue to be here, at least for the time being, it sounds like, which is awesome. So thank you so much for your time, for joining. And if someone wants to kind of reach out to you, what would be the best way if they wanted to maybe chat about some of these topics with you?
Well, I'm on LinkedIn. It's easy to find me there. I also have a personal website. It's mkovacs.net. It's spelled like MKOVAXX.net.
Awesome.
Yep. And all my sort of socials, GitHub, everything is on there.
Awesome. So we can include some links to those in the description as well. So if you want to reach out to Máté, take a look down in the description. But yeah, just thank you so much for joining.
Thank you for having me. I really enjoyed this chat.
Awesome. As did I. And if anyone watching wants to, see more from the Japan Dev podcast, please do subscribe to the channel and, leave us a like or a comment. I promise I will check all the comments and probably reply as well. So let me know what you thought. We really appreciate any kind of engagement that you can provide us with. So thank you so much for listening/watching. And I guess that's it. All right. Thank you.
Thank you.